Good morning, Read 180 students. We're going to continue working in our real books today. Today is Wednesday, April 29th, and we're going to continue part 3 of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Now, today, taking it back, the last couple of days we've been looking at literary elements, making inferences, analyzing the plot. Now today we're going to focus on analyzing characters. And again, remember the main characters in this story are the townspeople. And we have some specific characters like Mr. Summers, Mr. and Mrs. Hutchinson, Old Man Warner. We have some of the characters that are standing out. We're going to read a little bit more today with a focus on Tessie Hutchinson and kind of what's happening with her and how she feels about the lottery. So if you look at today's learning target, it is, I can describe how characters respond or change as the plot moves toward an ending. I can identify important events in a text and cite evidence. So just like we've done the last couple of days, we're going to focus on the vocabulary, which will be this first slide, page 146. And then if you turn to page 147, at the very top, there'll be the key idea. So once we complete the vocabulary, as we're reading, I want you to keep in mind what that key idea is going to be about. Now, if you look at it on page 147, it says, describe what happens after the first part of the lottery is complete. So I want you to hang on to that as we read. So when we finish reading these two pages together, you'll be able to answer that question. All right, so let's look back on page 146. And again, today we're going to examine how each member of the Hutchinson family responds to the second drawing of the lottery. Okay, so remember, yesterday, if you think back to the lesson, that's where Mr. Hutchinson, Bill Hutchinson, grabs his paper and he sees what's going to happen. Again, we found out from his body language that he just kind of stood there. We also know that Mrs. Hutchinson got very emotional and was yelling about maybe it not being fair. So we're going to examine again as we read about the second drawing of the lottery. Keep in mind, how does each of these members respond or act? Now, if you look at your first vocabulary word for academic vocabulary, the word is concerned, and it is an adjective, which is a describing word. And you can see off to the side, I have the definition. Concern means involved in something or affected by it. So when I think of my example, as far as permission forms are concerned, all students must have signed forms for all trips. I'm going to have you complete the example, and it says, what dress codes are concerned, or where dress codes are concerned, how do students at your school feel? So where dress codes are concerned, many students at my school feel what? What do you think they would think about a dress code where, like, if you had to wear a uniform, or like we weren't allowed to wear blue jeans or shorts, there would be a code involving something where everybody has to follow the same rule or the same process or the same code. Okay, our second word is remove, and remove is a verb or an action word, and the meaning is to take something away. If we're going to remove it, we're taking it away. So my example is, it's important to use a pot holder when you remove the lid from a hot pan. Now, your example that I want you to respond to is, why might we want to remove unhealthy foods from school cafeterias? So we might want to remove unhealthy food from school cafeterias because. I would like you to finish that sentence. Okay, and again, we're going to start reading together. I'd like you to follow along as I read aloud. And then we'll be turning to page 147 where you will stop the recording and I want you to answer that key idea. And again, What you're going to be watching for is describe what happens after the first part of the lottery is complete. Okay, so let's turn to page 146. Then, as far as drawing for families is concerned, it's you, Mr. Summers said in explanation. And as far as drawings for households is concerned, that's you too, right? Right, Bill Hutchinson said. How many kids, Bill? Mr. Summers asked formally. 3, Bill Hutchinson said. There's Bill Jr. and Nancy and little Dave, and Tessie and me. All right then, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you got their tickets back? Mr. Graves nodded and held up the slips of paper. Put them in the box then, Mr. Summers directed. Take Bill's and put it in. I think we ought to start over, Mrs. Hutchinson said as quietly as she could. I tell you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give him enough time to choose. Everybody saw that. Mr. Graves had selected the 5 slips and put them in the box, and he dropped all the papers but those onto the ground, where the breeze caught them and lifted them off. Listen, everybody, Mrs. Hutchinson was saying to the people around her. Ready, Bill? Mr. Summers asked, and Bill Hutchinson, with one quick glance around at his wife and children, nodded. Remember, Mr. Summers said, take the slips and keep them folded until each person has taken one. Harry, you help little Dave. Mr. Graves took the hand of the little boy, who came willingly with him up to the box. Take a paper out of the box, Davy, Mr. Summers said. Davy put his hand into the box and laughed. Take just one paper, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you hold it for him. Mr. Graves took the child's hand and removed the folded paper from the tight fist and held it while little Davy stood next to him and looked at him wonderingly. Nancy next, Mr. Summers said. Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, switching her skirt, and took a slip daintily from the box. And daintily means to kind of do it real delicately or kind of in a fussy manner. Bill Jr., Mr. Summers said, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, nearly knocked the box over as he got the paper out. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. She hesitated for a minute, looking around defiantly, and then set her lips and went up to the box. She snatched a paper out and held it behind her. And snatch means to quickly grab it or kind of grasping it really quickly. Bill, Mr. Summers said, and Bill Hutchinson reached into the box and felt around, bringing his hand out at last with the slip of paper in it. Okay, so what I want you to do now is, again, go back to page 147 and describe what happens after the first part of the lottery is complete. Go ahead and finish that sentence. Okay. Now, we're going to take a look at analyzing the characters. And so what I want you to do, according to the directions, you're going to write one word from the text, which means you need to go back into the 2 pages that we read. And you have to describe how each of the Hutchinsons draws a lottery slip out of the box. What does it tell you about each character? So as I read that, I even tried to kind of enunciate how each of those characters did that. So you're going to go back, find each of those characters' names, and find that word that would fit in the box. Okay. If we look in paragraph 65, Davy, it says, put his hand into the box and laughed. Now this kind of maybe tells me that he really doesn't understand the seriousness of the situation. If you notice how the other characters are all reacting like they don't want to be any part of this. Mrs. Hutchinson, Tessie, is getting very upset, and Davy, who's very young, remember he's one of the youngest of the children, he puts his hand in and he's laughing like it's kind of a fun thing. But that tells me he really isn't really in tune to how serious this event is. Okay. Now the last thing we're going to do is I want you to be looking at the react and write. How does Tessie feel about the lottery? Now, as you answer this, now remember when we say use details from the story, that means you need to go back in, and when you find that detail, that's going to be written with quotation marks around it. It's kind of like you're lifting it right out of the text. I know in some of the other pages, if you didn't get all the points, it's maybe because you gave your opinion or you gave your idea of what was happening, but you didn't cite that text evidence. So make sure you do both parts of that. So Tessie feels what? What do you think? And again, I want you, in order to get those 5 points, you want to make sure you go back and find 1 or 2 pieces of text evidence. Again, copy it right from the page. Probably, if you'll see, if it's about Tessie, might want to look on page 147. So again, find that evidence so I know what detail helped you make that judgment. All right, so that's it for today's lesson. Make sure you complete, I see it says 1461. It's 146 and 147. And complete your work in Google Classroom. Go ahead and submit that. Now remember too, we are getting ready, midterm reports are going out. You'll notice I did not put in grades from last week yet. They will be going in. But moving forward, for some of you, if you have not been keeping up with your lessons or your reading, remember, this is really important that you do that. You don't want it to become a burden for you as well. So make sure, if you have time today, go ahead and keep reading in your reading counts book. If you're getting ready to take a test, which I know a couple of you are, I will be sending those out to you. So keep me posted where you're at with that. Again, I'm not seeing from the group, so I want to make sure everybody's getting the same message. Okay, if you are behind at all, now's a good time to catch up. You don't want it to be an issue come the end of the week when things are due. And again, at any time, reach out to me if you are struggling or having difficulties logging in or doing anything. I will do my best to get answers for you. All right, that's it for today. I miss seeing you guys. This is a way different way of teaching. I hope that things are going well for you and that you're staying healthy. And maybe we'll see you soon.